All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Dunk on AP podcast. So, today we're going to be talking about the consequences of connectivity in the post classical world. So, without further ado, let's go dunk on AP. All right, so today is going to kind of be the culmination of all of the lessons that we've talked about so far. Now that we have nailed down what are these empires in the post classical world from 1200 to 1450, we've talked about Song China, we've talked about the sort of dispersed Indian empires, right? We've talked about Dar al Islam and the Abbasid Caliphate. We've talked about the dispersed and decentralized African empires. We've talked about the European beginning to centralize monarchies, but really mostly the feudal system. We've talked about the American empires and how they're a little bit more decentralized. But now that we've discussed them, what are the what are the consequences of them becoming interconnected? So let's start with a few major post-classical cities to know. Hangzhou, which was a Chinese city that was urbanized by trade. This wasn't necessarily the biggest city. It was only 1 million people at the time, but it was the cultural home. We know about it from the writings, actually, of Marco Polo. Samarkand and Kashgar were major centers of Islamic worship, bustling markets, and sources of fresh water for merchants on the Silk Road. Then you have Baghdad, which was of course the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate until it was sacked by the Mongols. Then you've got Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. It was a key trade hub between Europe and Asia, located in present-day Istanbul. It fell to the Ottoman Empire in 1453. The Crusades weakened it as well. So then you've got some other Silk Road cities that I'll just mention: Chang'an, Samarkand, which I've discussed, Aleppo, and Mosul, which is in present-day Iraq. Aleppo is in present-day Syria. Samarkand is in present-day Uzbekistan. Chang'an is in China. Then you've got the Indian Ocean trading cities. You've got Malacca, which is in present-day Malaysia. Calicut, which is in present-day India. Hormuz, which is in present-day Iran. Mombasa, which is in present-day Kenya. And then Alexandria, which is in present-day Egypt. And then you've got the trans-Saharan trading cities: Gao, Timbuktu, which is in present-day Mali. Marrakesh, which is in present-day Morocco. And Cairo, which is in present-day Egypt. So, some of the causes of Indian Ocean trade basin growth: increased environmental understanding. They now understand how monsoon winds work, so they can travel more safely across the Indian Ocean. Improved technologies like the compass, the astrolabe, larger ship designs, the lateen sail, and the ship rudder. Also, diasporic communities. These are companies of traders who made their homes away from their countries, especially if they intermarried with locals. Some examples of the diasporic communities: Muslims had them in China, the Indian Ocean basin in Europe. The Chinese had them in Southeast Asia and Africa. You had the Sogdian in Samarkand. Their regions were main caravan merchants along Silk Roads in China. You also had Jewish diasporic communities in China, India, and Europe. And then you had the Malay diasporic communities in Sri Lanka. So the trading world of the Indian Ocean basin is big, and it's going to connect so many of these societies via ocean trail or via ocean travel, and that is made possible because of the lateen sail and the rudder technologies that are being heavily used at this time. Also, some impacts of the intensification of Indian Ocean trade is the growth of trade cities and states in the basin, similar to the growth of trade cities along the Silk Road. You get Mogadishu and Mombasa on the Swahili coast. You also get the Sultanate of Malacca, and that's going to be a major trading post and where people kind of have to go through there because of its geographic location. Also, impacts of the intensification of Indian Ocean trade: it's gonna lead to interregional contacts and conflict that lead to technological and cultural transfers. Big ones include paper, of course, from China, gunpowder from China, and navigational tools. The Chinese begin large-scale naval expeditions under Zheng He, who takes 7 voyages, and his purpose is to collect tribute from distant states and to also establish commercial relations. He's the major Chinese explorer that you need to know. So he had a major ship, a huge ship that he used. And the Chinese junk is going to be another big reason why the Chinese are so successful at trading on the Indian Ocean. So a couple of cultural consequences of connectivity. So we're going to start to break these up into the different sort of ways that they the different ways that they are connected and the different changes that come because of that. So you're going to get the influence of Buddhism on East Asian culture. So you're going to get printing, making Buddhist scripture widely available. Buddhist writers influence Chinese literature, of course, and so of course that's going to lead to a little bit of a ding in Confucianism in China, and the Song Dynasty is not going to like that. Japan and Korea both adopt Buddhism and Confucianism. Of course, Japan and Korea are always going to be a little bit influenced by China at this time. And Neo-Confucianism in the Song Dynasty as a result of that growing Buddhism. Remember, Neo-Confucianism is sort of like a return to Buddhism. You're also going to get, as a cultural consequence of connectivity, the spread of Hinduism and Buddhism. Trade spreads Hinduism and Buddhism to Southeast Asia. You got the Srivijaya, the Hindu kingdom, and the Majapahit kingdom. You've got the Khmer Empire in present-day Cambodia, which was the most successful in Southeast Asia and had Hindu and Buddhist cultural influences. So these are the big like just cultural changes and the impacts that they had on each other. In Africa, you've got Swahili becomes the language that's a blend of Bantu and Arabic and is still widely spoken today. Timbuktu becomes a major center of Islamic learning. Leaders of African states deepen their Islamic ties through pilgrimages to Mecca too. South Asia, before Islam, Hinduism and Buddhism were popular. And then after Islam arrives, Buddhists convert more readily than Hindus because they were disillusioned by the corruption among Buddhist priests. Then, with its emphasis on equality, Islam actually attracts lower caste Hindus in India. Architecture blends Hindu designs with Islamic patterns. Urdu language had influences from Sanskrit-based Hindi, as well as from Arabic and Farsi, which was a Persian language. And then Bhakti poets and missionaries sought links between Buddhism and Hinduism. And then in Southeast Asia, Muslim rulers on Java combined Mughal Indian features, local traditions, and Chinese Buddhist and Confucian traits. And then traditional Javanese stories, puppetry, and poetry absorbed Muslim characters and techniques. So those are the cultural consequences of connectivity. So let's talk about the environmental influences or consequences of connectivity. So you get the migration of crops, of course, along with luxury goods, spices, textiles, and religion. Merchants spread crops to new places. This is like the innovation of champa rice, okay? Quick ripening rice introduced by Hindu Vietnam and given to China as a tribute. It's drought resistant and grows twice a year. It's going to lead to a big population boom in China. Bananas, introduced by Indonesian seafarers to sub-Saharan Africa, allowed Bantu to migrate to areas where yams did not grow because now they've got a food source. Sugar and citrus crops spread by caliphs outside of the Arabian Peninsula. And then Great Zimbabwe, one of the things you're going to see is overgrazing from overpopulation that was so severe, people actually had to leave the Great Zimbabwe. Agricultural production is also going to decline because of the plague. Now, economic consequences of connectivity. So each network of exchange is unique in its origins, but they're going to have some similar things about them. Okay, each network of exchange, they're going to begin before the post-classical era. They're also going to exist really for the sake of trade. They're going to exist for economic reasons. Okay, diplomats and missionaries will also trade the roads though, but then knots tie them together. One of the things that you're going to see through as an economic consequence is the more centralized nature of society and types of currency that result from the roads also. So some differences in labor, free peasant farmers, craft workers, or artisans in cottage industries, people who are forced to pay off debts and slaves. And then you've got irrigation canals, military defenses, and great buildings that are coming as a result of all of this change on the networks of exchange. So the goods, just to name off a few here to give you some examples of what was being traded around here. On the Silk Roads going east to west, you had silk, tea, spices, dyes, porcelain, and paper and gunpowder. West to east, you had horses, saddles, fruit, domestic animals, honey, textiles. The transportation they were using was horses, camels, saddles, and also they had the caravanserai where people could stay. Then on the Indian Ocean, from East Africa, you had gold, ivory, quartz, animal skins. From Southwest Asia, you had citrus, fruits, dates, books. From Southern India, you had textiles, peppers, and pearls. And then as far as transportation, you had dhows and junks, which were boats. Technologies, you had the stern rudder, the lateen sail, the astrolabe, and the magnetic compass. And then in the trans-Saharan for goods, you had going north to south, you had horses, books, and salts. And then south to north, you had gold, ivory, cloth, and enslaved people. The transportation they were using were caravans of camels for carrying goods. And a lot of times people just walked. And then for technology, you had saddles to increase load bearing. So that's going to be the big things that you need to know about cultural exchange at this time. You had the diffusion of literary, artistic, technological, and cultural traditions that are just so huge. A great example of all of this cultural exchange is Angkor Wat, one of the largest religious monuments in the world. It was constructed as a Hindu temple dedicated to Vishnu, but converted into a Buddhist temple with statues of Buddha placed throughout during the 1300s. And this is just an example of how these religions and cultures tended to blend. And speaking of the most famous consequence of all of this connectivity, the bubonic plague, or otherwise known as the Black Death. Knowledge of the world increases due to the Crusades. Because of this clash, remember the Crusades, of course, between the European world and Islam, because of the clash between the Byzantine Empire and Islamic cultures, it also increased demand for goods from what the Europeans, from China, from some of these places that they're starting to discover now. So this increased trade is going to also, though, lead to more disease. Particularly the Black Death, which was a major epidemic that broke out between 1347 and 1351. It originated in Central Asia and spread rapidly along trade routes. As many as 25 million people are going to die from the Black Death, and this is going to lead to economic decline. It also led to the decline of the feudal system because serfs become a lot more in demand. Remember, the feudal system, you had a system in which the serfs pretty much needed the landowners, but now the landowners are going to need the serfs a lot more because there just aren't as many of them. So Marco Polo was a famous explorer at this time. He made his first trip to China when he was 17 years old, and he meets Kublai Khan. He leaves China after 17 years. He was famously imprisoned during a war between Venice and Genoa. He told of his travels and his stories to his fellow inmates. One of his fellow inmates was a writer who compiled his stories into a large volume which circulates Europe, called The Travels of Marco Polo. Ibn Battuta was a famous Islamic scholar from 1304 to 1369. He worked in governments while extensively traveling. He tried to advance Sharia law. He wrote the Rila. The publication of his journal happened, and Battuta and Polo are among diplomatic travelers, and they really, in a lot of ways, bring the world together and bring a greater understanding of the world at that time. So this has been it for the consequences of connectivity. There certainly are a lot of them, but remember, now that we've laid the groundwork, we get to see really how this all shook out and what happened because of it.